Thank you everyone for coming to this Medicine Connect and ANACP event. Today we're going to be talking about the journey to medicine with future Dr. Allison Chow. We're very fortunate to have her with us today. Thank you very much. Allison is currently an undergraduate at New York University, majoring in biology, and then alongside her coursework, she also is heavily involved in healthcare-related activities. She volunteers at local hospitals, and she also works as a medical assistant in Flushing. And this event also would not be possible without partnership with the Medicine Connect blog. Their Medicine Connect is a group of teenagers who want to connect healthcare professionals and their expertise to the public through interviews and discussions. And they also want to support the medical interests of young people by allowing them a platform to learn and explore various healthcare careers and health topics. Thank you.
All right, so may I begin?
Yeah, you can start.
All right, awesome. Hi, everybody. Thank you again for being here. My name is Allison Chow, and I recently just graduated from NYU. I'm a winter grad. I graduated in 3.5 years, and I applied for medical school this cycle. All right, and I'm going to be sharing my journey to medicine with you all today. And we're going to be going over these four main things on our agenda for tonight. The first is going to be the application timeline. So that's going to be kind of when you're going to focus on certain things throughout your high school and undergraduate career if you're targeting to apply for medical school. Next, we're going to go through stats versus story, which is often an age-old debate when it comes to applying to medical school. Do you want higher grades or do you want a better narrative? We'll discuss that too. And then we're going to jump into extracurriculars with personal examples from me and what I did throughout my undergraduate career for extracurriculars. And lastly, the question I'm sure a lot of you guys are here for, how did I score that sweet full tuition scholarship to Geisinger Commonwealth School of Medicine? I will be going over that as well as how that program works as well. So let's get straight into it. Just a quick roundup. I did apply to 30 something medical schools. It's very common to not hear back from most medical schools. A lot of them will just ghost you, unfortunately, but I was privileged enough to have received 10 medical school interview invites so far. When you receive an interview invite, a lot of people like to say you're already 75% of the way there. You just gotta ace the interview and you're basically in. And so far, the cycle ends in May, but as of right now, January, I've been accepted to 3 schools, so I'm super pumped about that. Um, and a little bit about why I chose to pursue medicine specifically. Working with my Chinese American community all throughout my life has really made me passionate about primary care in the context of immigrant health. So that's a little bit about my story and my why. Okay, so let's start with the application timeline. So, I know some of you are in high school. Stephen let me know about that, so don't worry, I'm not forgetting about you guys. But high school is kind of when you want to start building that foundation. You want to start thinking about why you want to pursue medicine. Um, so what you can do in this stage is you can really start to understand what medicine is as a profession and as a career. Maybe you might grab an opportunity to shadow certain physicians. That's a great opportunity to learn about how medicine works and kind of get in on the action of a physician's day-to-day life. You might also start researching. I started researching in high school, and it's a great way to build a foundation for those basic lab skills that you'll need later on. I know a lot of high schoolers who also volunteer at their local hospitals. I started volunteering when I was 16, so that's a personal example. And also, I want you guys to start thinking about what is your story? I keep using this term story. Story means kind of your journey to wanting to become a physician. What really ignited that spark? What makes you want to pursue medicine so badly? And the reason why I put in parentheses here, beyond liking science and helping others, is because a lot of other people want to do that as well. So try to think about more personal reasons. Okay, And then we're going to jump into college years 1 and 2. This is when you're going to want to focus on those prereq classes. You want to maintain a good GPA. And you, again, if you haven't started this in high school, now you're going to want to start thinking about those extracurricular activities. Now's the time to develop good study habits. Find a study routine that works for you. You also want to maintain good relationships with professors. Same goes with supervisors, research PIs, etc., because you might need letters of recommendation or references from these people when you do apply to medical school. So it's important to maintain that good rapport. And then you want to start getting involved on and off campus to build your resume. So you want a nice balance of doing school-related things like clubs, and you also want some off-campus stuff so that way you can kind of really branch out your connections. And then year 3, this, in my opinion, is the most crucial year for applying to medical school because this is when you begin to study for and take the MCAT. Um, I feel like if you ask anybody about when they want to take the MCAT, it's a differing opinion from everyone, but my personal opinion is that you should take it third year because that's usually when you're done with all of your or most of your prerequisites. And then after you take your MCAT, hopefully you get your score back in time to begin your primary application. That's just you put your list of schools, you write your personal statement, your transcripts, your grades, your letters of rec, and obviously your test score. And then lastly, in college year 4, that's kind of where I am right now, but I did graduate a little bit early, so I would have been in college year 4 now, but this is where I am. You want to complete your secondary applications, which are school-specific prompts. And then you want to go through the interview process. Hopefully, you guys get a lot of interviews. And then you're going to choose a school. In this case, my advice is to please pre-write your secondaries. What pre-write means is a lot of schools, they have their prompts online and they've been recycling their prompts for years and years. So it's in your best interest to get ahead of the game and you can take those prompts from online and really just draft those answers ahead of time so that when it comes time for the secondary questions to come in, you kind of already knew the questions and you kind of already read up the answers so you can send them right in. If you do the math is not my strongest subject, but I applied to 32 schools, I think. Each school had 5 secondary essays. That's upwards of 150 essays to write within the span of 2 months. So you're going to want to pre-write. And then you want to do plenty of mock interviews. You can contact your friends, your family, honestly, anybody. Do mock interviews and get familiar with different interview styles. Okay, now we're going to jump into stats, aka grades, scores, versus story, which is your narrative and your unique appeal. So I want to emphasize that stats are important, but they are absolutely not everything. So I pulled a statistic from the AAMC, and it said that 17% of high stat applicants last cycle, meaning MCAT higher than 517 of 528 and GPA higher than 3.85 of 4, are still rejected from every single school that they apply to. So these kids with absolutely top grades, flawless GPA, they still get rejected from every single school and they still get into no schools. They're not going to get into medical school and so they have to try again next year. I don't say this to scare you. I say this because a lot of people think that just because they get a really high MCAT score means that they don't have to do extracurriculars. They don't have to write their essays well. But that's absolutely not true. You need to have both. I like to think of good stats as kind of your foot in the door. And the reason why is because high stat applicants often get priority for earlier interviews. So if a school sees that you have nice stats, they might send you an interview a little bit sooner than somebody with slightly lower stats. But that doesn't mean that you're going to get in just because you get that interview earlier. Those other applicants with not so high stats are still going to get the interview. And chances are, if they're able to better sell their narrative, then they're going to get in instead of the people with the high stats. Okay, now the question is, what stats are considered good enough? Because we do have to draw a line here. Someone with a 495 MCAT, they're gonna have to retake it because it's out of 528. So my general advice is to aim for above average. So average statistics are very easy to pull out of the AAMC website. So last year's average matriculant stats, keep in mind, average applicant stats and average matriculant stats are different because the matriculant stats are the people who actually got into medical school. So theirs are going to be a little higher. So those are the grades you want to look at. So the MCAT was 512 and the GPA was 3.81. Pretty achievable. Just a side note here, As somebody who is all for DEI and all for affirmative action, we do have to accept, though, that race can affect average stats. Average stats can sometimes differ, especially if you are an overrepresented minority in medicine. This is a term that a lot of people use in the application scene. It usually means that you are Asian or South Asian. I personally tried for slightly higher than average, so MCAT 515 and GPA 385, and that worked pretty well for me. All right, if you were paying attention in the last slide, you may have noticed that my MCAT score is not even that high. Now, granted, it is a 92nd percentile score, so it's decent, it's there, but it's not like, oh my gosh, her stats are so high, let's give her an interview right away, right? So, how did I manage to get all those interviews? Well, that's really where my story and the rest of my application comes in. I focused on three main things. The first was the toll of mental illness. As I was mentioning to our co-hosts and other ANACP members earlier, before this meeting started, I've gone through a lot of losses or close to losses with people that I care about. And it was due to the toll of mental illness and the cultural stigma around mental health. So that's something that I wanted to address as a future physician. The next is the social determinants of health and barriers to care. So those are anything in a patient's life that might affect their ability to access high quality care. It could be that they can't afford the insurance copays. It could be that they can't find an accurate mode of transportation to get to their doctor's appointment. Those are things that I saw a lot while working as a medical assistant, and it made me very passionate about doing something about that as a physician. And lastly, a little bit on a smaller scale, culturally competent primary care. I do think that primary care is the backbone of our health system, and that is something that I want to contribute to as a physician. All right, so now I'm going to give you guys some tips on what to think about for your story. So the first I have is life-changing events. So as I mentioned earlier, things that happen to you during your upbringing, parts of your background, really who make like things that make you you. So for example, did you grow up in a community where healthcare wasn't a guarantee? Did you lose a loved one that made you want to find a cure for others like them? Admissions committees really like when you draw on real life experiences that drew you towards medicine. And the reason for this is because instead of just saying stuff like, I like science and I want to help people, you are saying things that are unique to you. And it really shows that you have that personal connection to medicine, and that's a green flag in their eyes. Another thing that you might want to think about talking about are experiences from extracurricular activities. I've gotten feedback from some of my interviewers. They absolutely love when students use real life stories from their extracurricular activities in order to answer questions during interviews. I think it's really great to also pull experiences from ECs in your secondary essays as well. And a lot of the time, people even advise you to write about them in your primary personal statement. So, really, these experiences from extracurricular activities are very, very important. One piece of advice I have here is to keep a patient experience journal. I have one in Google Docs, and it's basically where I keep track of dates and locations where I have a particularly impactful experience with a patient or a group of patients. Without violating HIPAA, obviously. When you do write up your application, you can't include any of that sensitive health info, and you're often asked to create pseudonyms for the people that you are referring to. But the point of keeping that patient experience journal is so that over your 4+ years of applying to medical school, you don't forget where your experiences happened and when they happened. And you have kind of like an easy place to pull experiences from. So, an example of this would be maybe you shadowed a doctor who opened your eyes to the power of medicine, or the volunteer work that you did gave you a greater appreciation for patient-centered care. So, admissions committees really want to understand that you know all sides of medicine, including the challenges. One thing that admissions committees are a little bit wary of is when you say you have really big goals. I do know that one of my interviewers commented that my motivations for pursuing medicine and my goals are very, very big and they're going to be hard to attain. But what I was able to do with her was I was able to draw experiences from extracurricular activities as well as my personal life experiences to kind of really back that up and convince her that I wasn't just saying I wanted to do these things, I was already starting to do them. And lastly, speaking of things we want to do with our careers, you want to think about your future career goals. So, one question that's very hard to answer for a lot of students during interviews is why do you want to be a physician specifically? Why not any other healthcare profession? There's PAs now, there's NPs, a lot of mid-level practitioners, and then there's also other doctors like PharmDs and DPTs. So why must you become a physician? Why does it have to be medicine, and why do you have to be a doctor? So this is where I find it's a little bit more helpful to talk about your future career goals. So one example of how I tackled this question was I kind of brought in a little bit of research. I'm currently dipping my feet in different types of research, but I do know that something I would want to pursue as a physician is public health research, as it kind of goes along with my story very well. I do think that it is easier to participate in research as a physician. Other things are that physicians get a little bit more autonomy. So when I talk about being a physician advocate, I want to be able to stand up for my patients and to create positive change for them. And so in this case, it's a little bit easier to do that as a physician when you have a little more leeway with how you kind of run things. So those are just a few examples of how I tied in my future career goals to my personal story. And again, admissions committees really want to see that you've thought long and hard about being a doctor. It's not an easy path. It's very long. It can get very tiring, but it's very rewarding in the end. And so they want to make sure you know how being a doctor specifically can help you make an impact on medicine. So if you are in high school, good news, you have a lot of time to think about this stuff. If you're in college and you haven't started thinking about this yet, don't panic because my narrative kind of fell together for me maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, so it was relatively recent. Allow those experiences to happen and really reflect on any changes in your life that have been going on, as these are very helpful for the way you present your story. Okay, and here's a little bit of guidance about what maybe you should avoid saying for your story. The first is I like money, along with other things like I like prestige, anything relating to that. I like job security, I like financial security, anything like that. Maybe we want to avoid that. And the reason why is because if you want to make money, there are so many easier ways to do so than being a doctor. You could work in finance, you could own your own business. Even a lot of other healthcare professionals, if you do it right, you can make even more than doctors. So again, training is a lot to become a doctor. And so if you just doing it for the money, then you might not be as happy in the long run. And you also might not make as good of an impact on medicine as someone who, say, has the passion for it. Another thing, which is a little bit controversial, I find, is I like science. The reason why I say this is not because I think you shouldn't like science or that you shouldn't express that you like science. It's just that basically you like science as much as the next applicant. Because if you apply to medical school, it's kind of given that you like science. You kind of had to sit through all of these science prereqs like biology, chemistry, physics. And so it's kind of not saying much if you just say that you like science. So there are more impactful ways to express this, in my opinion. So I would steer away from especially wording like that. And lastly, I know this applies to a lot of you here, but when are specifically asked, why do you want to pursue medicine? I find that a lot of the times people who have been in my shoes, who have applied to medical school, find it a little bit more helpful to steer away from the my parents are doctors narrative. And the reason why is because you are the one applying for medical school, not your parents. They want to see your personal motivations for becoming a doctor. Kind of what happened in your life, what happened in your career trajectory. Um, so in this case, I do think that there are maybe a few very minor exceptions. And I put an asterisk here because if your parents' experience as a doctor somehow completely changed your life or your perspective on medicine, then you may be able to get this one to work. I had a friend, she worked with her father, who was a physician very, very closely, and she was telling me about how it kind of opened her eyes to the challenges in medicine. So that's something to bring up. I think that's a very good point to bring up, but I don't think that it should be the sole reason or sole kind of narrative that you use to deliver your story, if that makes sense. Okay, now we're going to jump into extracurricular activities with personal examples from my EC section. So, we're going to talk about the main extracurricular types or categories. I sorted them into four main types, but you'll see that when you do apply for medical school, there are many, many, many different sub-distinctions. So, kind of, it doesn't matter how you label it as much as how you describe it. So, I wouldn't worry about that too early on. Anyways, with that being said, the first is clinical experience. So, as you might expect, this is anything related to patient care or treating patients. So, anything when you're in direct contact with patients. So, this would be like EMT, this would be like phlebotomist, medical assistant, things like that, where you're actively providing care to patients. Recently, my hospital has had a very strange development where patient comfort volunteers are not the same as clinical experience. What you define as clinical experience in that context can get a little bit wishy-washy, but as my mentor likes to say, it really depends more on how you frame it and how you write it. So if you're going to write about it like it is a clinical experience, you may as well label it clinical experience. But if you're going to label it as more of like a volunteering type thing, then maybe you can sort it into non-clinical. My tip is to kind of budget out your extracurriculars. So, say you have three clinical activities already, and but you don't have any non-clinical volunteering activities. Maybe then one of those activities can be sorted into the non-clinical volunteering category. So, it's not about filling the categories, it's just about having that nice, well-rounded application. So, be smart about how you write about your activities. So my personal examples for this category are working as a medical assistant at a neurology clinic. So my job is to administer tests. I do a lot of cognitive tests. I do autonomic nervous system tests. I also help the doctor take notes with patients, and I also do triage, which is basically just checking patients in and taking their vitals. As I mentioned earlier, EMT is also a good one. Phlebotomy, EKG, those are also good ones as well. And I also have treating delirium patients at the hospital. So this is me providing evidence-based interventions, psychiatric interventions to patients who are not doing so well mentally at the hospital. I also volunteer at an underserved primary care clinic where I would help with patient charting and I would help with taking patient history. That's also considered clinical because I am directly participating in the care of patients. All right, next we have research. These are independent or supervised projects. It's basically either you are synthesizing data, you are analyzing data, or you are collecting data. And it's better to kind of write it up in some sort of poster presentation, or you wrote it in the form of a manuscript. It's really great to kind of have that final product, but if you don't have it, no worries. You can still write about your experience as it happened. So my advice for this would be to join some sort of research group or research lab at a university because that's the easiest way that you can kind of participate in research. It's a lot harder to pay for and fund your own research if you're just doing it at home. So finding a mentor or a supervisor, in my opinion, is the best way to go about research. So my personal examples for this were wet bench work at NYU Grossman Long Island School of Medicine. Um, just a point here, I was very intentional about that. So, my dream school is NYU, and I am waiting for their decision to come back. And so, something I did was I kind of made all my experiences related to NYU. I volunteered at NYU Langone System, I did wet bench work, and I did research at NYU Grossman Long Island School of Medicine. I went to NYU for undergrad, so I figured, kind of compiling all of these experiences makes it seem like, I kind of know how the system works. I'm homegrown, so they're more likely to kind of take me into consideration. I've talked to a lot of other people who have applied to medical school. I have a friend who really wants to go to Albert Einstein College of Medicine. That's another free program. And so she purposely, worked under Einstein for a little bit. She researched under Einstein. So if you have that one medical school that you're really, really dreaming about and you really, really want to go to, I encouraged you to pursue at least one activity under them so that way you can at the very least understand how their system works. All right, moving on. I have data collection and clinical studies under ANACP. I do research with a few of our ANACP physicians and pharmacists, so that was super cool. And then, in order to kind of quantify your research experiences, there are separate categories for publications, poster presentations. So, I did see some of you, especially high schoolers, presenting posters at the conference in Dallas back in October. That's really great. You can include that in your activities section because those count as a poster presentation. And that's basically just you showcasing your research. So I've done a couple of research conferences. I've also published an abstract, two poster presentations, two clinical studies, and I won an award for my research. All right. So the third category is leadership. So basically, this is very straightforward. Any positions or titles where you are managing a team. So my personal example here would be editor-in-chief of NYU Integrated Psychology Review and treasurer of Gray Matters NYU. These two are journal clubs under NYU, and they basically do a two-in-one. Not only do they show that I have leadership experiences, but they also line up with my hobby, which is writing. And then I also have lead volunteer at NYU Langone Hospital. I'm in a leader position here because I train other volunteers. And I'm also the founder and president of my very own organization, STEM Powered, which aims to get young girls involved in STEM careers. Okay, and lastly, we have basically just all non-clinical involvements. Don't let the fact that you're applying to medical school dissuade you from including things that aren't related to medicine, research, or patient care. It's still very important that admissions committees see that you're a person and not a robot. So I have a lot of friends who like to include hobbies on their activities section, but I personally kind of weaved my hobbies in by showing some non-clinical involvements that I did have. So the first one was that I was a science teacher and also the assistant manager at a summer camp near my house. That taught me a lot, so I put that into my activity section. I was also a piano teacher at an academy, and that goes along with me really enjoying playing piano. All
Hello.
right, and then oh, sorry. And then other types of extracurriculars can include athletics. So like if you're on a sports team, especially if you're D1, so you can include that here. Medical schools, for whatever reason, I've noticed, love student athletes. They're very, even if the athletes like they have slightly lower stats or they're lacking somewhere else in their application, they very much favor the student athletes. So it works in your favor if you are a student athlete. The other one is social justice. I did happen to categorize my STEM powered as well as a program at NYU that we have to give back to underserved populations under social justice. And social justice basically just means you're giving back to people who need it most and you're supporting your community. And then we have military service, if this happens to apply to anyone. If you served in the Army or Navy, or you went through some sort of degree program where you served and then they gave you a degree in return. And also, I didn't personally do this one, and I thought it was necessary at first, but apparently it's not because I got into plenty of medical schools, but it's hobbies. So some people advise that you put a hobby on your activities section list. Okay, and the last section is going to be about my full tuition scholarship. So I was accepted to the Geisinger Commonwealth School of Medicine. It is in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and their main mission is to give back to underserved immigrant and rural populations, which basically are characteristic of that area in Pennsylvania. So they have what's called the Abigail Geisinger Scholars Program. Abigail Geisinger, she was the one who founded the Geisinger Health System, and she was a philanthropist. She really wanted to see that the hospital really focused on serving local communities and also gave back to those in need. So if you'll notice here, it says, what happens when better health is built on primary care? So this scholars program is focused around primary care. So I will go over what primary care is in the next slide, but for now, I'm going to explain kind of how the scholars program works. So, as you all can know, medical schools can be very, very expensive. Without the scholarship, it would have cost me $68,000 a year in tuition alone, so not living expenses or fees or anything like that, to go to Geisinger. Because it is so far away from home and it's also a private institution. So what Abigail Geisinger Scholars Program does is it basically waives your tuition. So they not only waive your tuition, but they also give you a $2,000 per month stipend that includes summers and winter breaks. So in total, 2 times 12 is 24. So you get $24,000 a year on top of your tuition getting waived. Now, what do you have to do? What do you have to promise to them? Well, first of all, you have to promise that you will pursue residency and practice in one of the primary care specialties. Another thing is for the number of years that they waive your tuition, you have to come back and you have to work for their health system as an attending. So let's say, for example, I chose internal medicine and I went to the Abigail Geisinger Scholars Program medical school for 4 years. And then I came out, I had my basically debt forgiven. But now, because they gave me 4 years of help, I have to give them back 4 years of help. So after I go to residency, I practice as an internal medicine physician in their health system. So that's basically the way this agreement works. It's kind of like they help you and then you help them back for the same amount. Okay, so how do I think I secured a full tuition scholarship? Actually, not how do I think, because I have the acceptance letter right here, so they basically told me. The great thing about Geisinger is they give personalized acceptance letters, so I'll read that to you guys in a little bit. But based on what they said, the first thing was mission fit. For those of you who are already in college, I think you guys are very familiar with this term, mission fit, but basically every medical school has a specific mission that they want to fulfill. It could be that they want to advance cancer research. It could be that they want to give back to the community. It could be that they want to advance public health. These are all just examples. But Geisinger's mission specifically was to focus on patient-centered care, was to focus on community health, and also to serve immigrant communities. And then I want to remind you again, what is my story? Growing up in an immigrant community, I noticed barriers to care that I wanted to address in these underserved populations. And so, if you'll notice, they match up pretty perfectly. Geisinger's philosophy behind immigrant health and community health aligns very well with what I hope to achieve as a physician and what I've already been doing and the communities I've already been serving in my undergraduate career. So that sort of matching up of my mission and Geisinger's mission, I think that definitely helped a lot. And then moving on, the second part is going to be interview skills. Do not underestimate the interview. I feel like everybody underestimates the interview because they said, okay, so they liked my application enough to give me an interview. All I got to do is not be a weirdo. But that's not true. You actually have to practice interview skills. They don't come naturally to a lot of people. And plus, there's a lot of different interview formats you want to get familiar with. There's one called an MMI, which is stands for multiple mini interview, and that tests your ability to reason well ethically. They give you behavioral and ethical scenarios, and they ask you to basically reason your way through and find a solution to these really big medical problems. Um, Another type is basically the traditional interview. That's just like a one-on-one conversation, what you would expect an interview to look like. The thing about Geisinger is that they did both. So I really had to learn both formats. So in order to get into Geisinger's regular medical school, I had to get good at answering ethics questions because their first round was an MMI circuit. And so they ask ethics and behavioral questions to test my ability to think outside of the box. So, for example, a patient has some sort of personal, cultural, or religious belief that is preventing them from complying with your treatment. As the physician, what do you do? Or you have one patient who has X problem, you have another patient who has Y problem, you only have one ICU bed left, who gets the bed? So these are kind of these complicated ethics questions that you got to get good at reasoning through. My one piece of advice for this is that I did take an SJT. SJT stands for Situational Judgment Test, and those are either Casper under Acuity Insights Company or Preview under AAMC's company. I actually took both. And a lot of schools actually require it, so I would go ahead and take those if you are kind of already applying to medical school if you happen to be, because those basically help you automatically prepare for those ethics scenarios because they ask kind of the same type of questions. So that was my number one way to prepare by taking a situational judgment test. Obviously, you can also find a lot of example prompts online and you can practice through them. There's a lot of YouTube videos too. So you get the idea. And then was the traditional interview. So once they said, hey, you're allowed into our medical school, but we also want to consider you for this full tuition scholarship program. And so then I had to pass the traditional interview, which is the second interview from this school. And so they basically ask questions like, why Geisinger? Why specifically? What do you know about Geisinger's patient population? What specialty are you planning on pursuing and why? So these are the types of questions they ask, and you have to get good at giving your answers intentionally and somewhat concisely. Here are some tips I have to kind of do that. The first is to connect with the interviewer, especially if you're doing some sort of one-on-one traditional interview. It helps a lot to be able to find a connecting point with your interviewer. So, for example, I remember during one of my interviews, I had a physician who was very passionate about culturally sensitive care. That's something that I also had exposure to, so we had a nice conversation about that. And so that would help her better remember who I am as an applicant and also kind of what my values are when it comes to that subject. You also want to do basically simple etiquette things like maintaining eye contact, having a positive attitude, and also what I like to call don't step on the interviewer's toes. And that's basically when your interviewer asks you a question and then you kind of redirect the conversation to something that you want to talk about. Unfortunately, I hate to break this to you, but it's not about what you want to talk about. It's what the interviewer wants to talk about. So just do a good job, follow the interviewer's lead, unless the interviewer asks you to say something or you to ask questions. In that case, you can redirect the conversation, but just try and maintain that nice conversational flow. You also want to use your personal experiences, like I said earlier. So when someone asks you a question, don't just give a simple one sentence answer. Kind of draw on what you've learned from your undergraduate career and your journey to medical school. So, for example, one of the schools I interviewed at, they asked, what is your opinion on humanism in medicine? So not only did I say I'm all for humanism in medicine, I also backed it up by talking about an experience I had with a patient from volunteering at NYU Langone. So you want to enhance your interview answers in this manner by kind of giving evidence from your own personal life. And then this third category, last but not least, is variable depending on the program. So for Geisinger, it was commitment to service, aka giving back to the community, giving back to Geisinger, being able to commit to being and attending there for 4 years. So that was commitment to service. Schools like Albert Einstein, Johns Hopkins, which also have free tuition programs, they are more geared towards research. So make sure that when you apply for these free tuition programs, if you really, really, really want to get in, make sure that you understand what sorts of applicants they are looking for, strong in research or strong in service. For Geisinger, they very, very much lean towards service. So now we're going to go over the primary care specialties. These are internal medicine, family medicine, pediatrics or med-peds. They have a combined one now, which is very cool. Sometimes general surgery, depending on the program, and also very occasionally psychiatry. I believe Geisinger does consider psychiatry primary care. You won't find this everywhere at every program, though. So, some free programs, they ask you to commit to a primary care specialty. Some free programs, they don't care. So, like, for example, with NYU, that's the distinction between NYU Grossman in New York City and NYU Grossman Long Island. I applied to NYU Grossman Long Island because I knew I wanted to do primary care. They're primary care focused, so again, like Geisinger, they're going to ask me to commit to one of the primary care specialties. But the one in the city, they don't care. You could do any one you want. But just make sure if you're applying to a free program with primary care focus that you actually want to do primary care because you're going to have to commit to it. And also, are you willing to give back to the school's community? So, something that Geisinger tested me with over and over again throughout their interviews and their secondaries is really making sure I understand the patient population well. So, what kind of patients am I going to be seeing as a medical student, a resident, and a physician? So, you want to show that long-term commitment to giving back to that school's patient population. And then lastly, something I think was my greatest strength is an application that is service heavy. So when I say service heavy, I mean most of my extracurriculars were geared towards community service, social justice, and basically giving back to others. So that was my application narrative, and that's why I consider myself service heavy. Some of you guys are going to be research heavy. So you're going to be focused on finding cures. You're going to be focused on advancing healthcare, healthcare delivery. So your application is going to be research heavy. So you may not fit as well into this Geisinger program or NYU, but you may fit way more well into Albert Einstein or uh, Johns Hopkins. So, yeah, I think that is basically all I had for this. And I can read you guys my 2 sentences from my acceptance letter. They told me exactly why they accepted me. They said, in reviewing your application, the admissions committee was particularly impressed with your outstanding academic performance, your service work as a medical assistant, and your leadership role as founder and president of STEM Powered. Notice those last two things, service work as medical assistant and STEM Powered, those are social justice community service geared. So that is exactly what this program is looking for. They're looking for people who want to give back to the community, who are committed to advocacy and service in medicine. So every free program is going to be different. We have this one from Geisinger. We have the two NYU programs, Johns Hopkins. I also mentioned Albert Einstein. There's also one called Cleveland Clinic in Ohio, and I believe there is one. I might be mistaken about this, but I heard that Kaiser gives a lot of free tuition scholarships to its students as well. So those are all of the ones I know of, and I think that wraps up my presentation. Yes. So shall we start Q&A?
Yes, thank you very much. So our first question is, what credentials do you need to be a medical assistant?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So it depends on the place you work. There are official certification programs for medical assistants, but if you work in a private practice setting like I do, they often train you on site, on the spot. So you're not going to need a certification for that. But it does help to have certain minor certifications. So I'm certified in phlebotomy, which is basically where you use the needle and you put it into the person's arm to draw blood. I'm also certified in EKG, which is basically monitoring the heart. So those two smaller certifications kind of got my foot in the door for that medical assistant position. But credentials wise depends on where you work.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Another question. Are MD and DO, do they need separate processes or do they apply in the same applications?
That is a very good question. So MD and DO are different application systems. So AMCAS is the MD application portal, and then ACOMAS is the DO application portal. So I did happen to apply to one DO school. They just never got back to me. But I applied to them via ACOMAS, and so it's a separate application system completely. Does that answer the question? Or do they want me to go more into MD versus DO?
Uh, I'm not sure. Um, oh, there's a. Oh, they want to go more into detail.
Sure, no problem. So, basically, MD and DO are effectively the same when you start practicing. But in terms of schooling, it's ever so slightly different because for DO, you have to take COMLEX, which is an exam, and then you also have to take USMLE as well. So you basically take double the exams in DO school. You also have something called OMM, which is some osteopathic, basically maneuvers and procedures that are very cool that you learn to do as an osteopathic physician. Whereas for MD schools, you kind of just do those USMLE exams and you go straight into residency. There is some stigma around applying to DO school as they require lower stats than MD schools, but that doesn't make DOs any less of good doctors than MDs. Once they start practicing, it's exactly the same.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, oh, there's a question. Someone is asking, is there any advice for unconventional applicant? They're an undergraduate in business, but they want to do pre-med.
Yeah, so I actually have a big majority I think I was looking around upper 60s percentile are unconventional applicants. So gap year applicants, people who switch majors, things like that. So that's wonderful that you want to switch to medicine. So in this case, you'd have to go back to school, either for a post-bac if you've already finished university, or if you're still in university, you still got time to take those courses. You need to take those prerequisites to take the MCAT, like those science courses, chemistry, biology, etc. So you have to be taking those. And then my advice for you is to kind of take a little bit more time. You might need to take a gap year, especially if you're doing like a switch from business, which is completely different, to medicine, and really build up your hours in those extracurricular clinical experiences.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Someone is asking how do medical school admissions weight university prestige in GPA?
That is a very good question, and that is a problem I've been trying to solve. Not a problem as in it's an issue, but it's like a question I've been trying to solve. So I've been trying to use my pattern recognition skills in the multitude of interviews that I've been in. And what I've noticed is that a lot of applicants actually go to very prestigious universities, a lot more prestigious than mine, NYU. I see a lot of like Ivy League applicants and things like that. But that's not to say that if you go to a state school, you can't get into medical school. It's just that certain schools have certain programs that are known to be more rigorous. So, for example, when I applied and interviewed with SUNY Downstate in Brooklyn, they basically, my interviewer pulled up my application and she said, "Wow, you went to NYU. I know their organic chemistry program is very, very tough." So she was basically saying that some schools they recognize certain programs that are more rigorous than others. So if you go to a more prestigious university, and by prestigious I don't mean it has a better name, I mean it has harder courses. So not those Ivies with grade inflation. But yeah, they'll notice that. That's not to say that people who go to state schools are at a disadvantage. I'm just saying that sometimes when you do harder things, it can give you an advantage.
Great, thank you.
Hmm.
Um, Dawson is asking, how do medical schools view teaching positions such as like academic tutor or TAs?
Oh my God, they love that stuff. They love it because one big aspect of medicine is mentorship. So what you can do is you can kind of turn those teaching and TA experiences and kind of put them into your narrative as kind of this love for mentorship. I think that's very cool. My mentor himself did that, and obviously he likes to mentor people because he's my mentor. But teaching is a huge part of medicine, and it's very important to include those experiences on your application because those are looked quite positively at.
Got it, thank you.
Mhm.
Um, oh, I was just wondering, like, what time is like the meeting supposed to conclude? Because there's a lot of great questions in the
It's
chat. I'm just
supposed to
not.
conclude at 9, but I'm happy to stay after for like 15 minutes or so if we don't get to all of them. I'm happy to.
Oh,
It depends on like everybody else's schedule and things like that.
oh, okay.
Mhm.
Alright, so another question was, did you take the Casper and preview and when? And then how do you prepare for the test?
Yeah, so Casper and Preview, um, notoriously difficult situational judgment test exams. So I took them after I knew I was going to apply to medical school. So if I didn't know I was applying this cycle, I wouldn't have taken them. So I took them shortly after I submitted my primary application. If you want to be safe, you can take them earlier, but I took them in late June. So I submitted my primary application on like June 2nd, and then I took those tests after. You can still do that because the test scores will still automatically fill in when you complete your secondaries. So, same goes with the MCAT. If you happen to submit your primary app without your MCAT score, once you finish taking the MCAT and the score comes back, it'll be sent to the schools. So, that's when I took it. And how did I prepare for it? I watched a lot of YouTube videos. So, a lot of videos on YouTube, just search up like how to ace the Casper or like how to do well on preview. And there's a lot of people that are very nice walking you by step tutorials, and then they teach you how to recognize the certain question types, and they give you like a kind of a structure on how to answer the ethical questions.
Great, thank you.
Hmm.
Um, do STEM and research and hospital shadowing hours in high school count towards your med school application?
That is a good question. I had that question as well. So if you started them in high school, but then you stopped them before you went to university, those do not count. If you started them in high school and you continue those same experiences throughout university, those count. So, for example, I was a volunteer at NYU Langone since I was 16, and I did the same program all the way up for 4.5 years. So, I counted all of those hours.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, Someone was asking, they're thinking of going to pre-med in college, and then what like activities would you suggest that they do the summer of their high school senior year?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, I would advise that you at least slow down just a little bit because that gap between senior year of high school and first year of college, you actually want to take a little bit of time to relax and kind of recharge because university is going to get very hard and you don't want to go, all out that summer because you want to be able to still have energy to, adjust to a new environment in university. So what I did was I did some research part-time, I did some teaching part-time. So for my recommendations for you, honestly, I would say just do what you enjoy. But if you really, really want to get ahead on starting those traditional pre-med activities, I would suggest maybe doing some shadowing so that when you go into university, you can kind of have a seed planted in your head, like, oh, I might focus on these few specialties, and I don't really like these specialties, so I'm not going to bother wasting my time with those. That was me with surgery. And then I would also recommend, kind of starting a little bit of maybe like hospital volunteering or something like clinical that you can take into your undergraduate year. So, like the previous person's question as to whether those high school hours count, now would be a good time to kind of establish some things, to begin some things that you can take into your college career with you. I would say research is very optional at this time because you're not in university yet, and so you don't have those connections to be able to join a lab at university. So if you're not yet in a lab, I would kind of hold off on research for now.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Someone is asking, which clinical experience would be better among EMT, MA, and scribe for a student during the summer before the first year?
Ooh, very good question. Wait, first year of university or first year of medical school?
I said first year, a student during the summer before the first year, it's like before freshman in college.
Okay, all right. So in this case, if you have your EMT certification, I'd already be very surprised because a high schooler getting an EMT certification, that is a lot of work. So honestly, I would say out of the three, EMT is kind of like that cookie cutter, that like, kind of that secure, safe way to go. But I knew in my heart that I would not be able to handle EMT. I'm not the type of person that does well in like super, super stressful, emergency, fast-paced environments, so I didn't go with EMT. So honestly, out of the three of them, as long as you have an impact on your patients and you're able to write about that, they're all good. But if you really want to super, super stand out and you can handle it, I think EMT is really, really great.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, Someone is asking, what is your recommendation when to send in primary applications and how soon to turn secondary applications back to schools?
Wow, this person's on top of it. Very good question. So, primary application as soon as possible. Actually, anything in this cycle as soon as possible. And do you know why? A lot of the medical schools, they have what's called rolling admissions. And so rolling admissions is when whoever submits their application earliest gets the result back the earliest. So if you submit your primary in earlier, you're going to get your secondary back earlier. And then if you submit your secondary early, you're going to get that interview back earlier. So that's a really good idea to kind of do it as early as possible. It does vary by a few days every year, but for my cycle, the primary application opened on May 28th. I was not ready by May 28th because I had taken my MCAT in April, so that score didn't come back yet. So I wanted to wait for my MCAT score to come back and then I would submit the application. So I actually submitted on June 3rd, which is still very soon, or June 2nd. Anyways, it was very soon after May 28th. The point is submit early. Secondaries, most of them come back starting beginning of July. So you're going to want to get on those as fast as possible. I know it's hard because it's like hundreds and hundreds of essays, but that's why in between the time that you submit your primary and you kind of wait for your secondaries, I would advise pre-writing within that 1 month period.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
There's a question. Do you have advice on how to get shadowing?
How to get shadowing. Oh, this one's tricky because the thing about shadowing is that people with more connections often do better. But where I would start if you don't know any other physicians is with your primary care physician. So if you see a pediatrician or an internal medicine physician, first ask them if you can shadow them. But the way I got a lot of shadowing experience was that, again, I volunteered at the hospital. And so since I already had everything set up, like my immunizations, my ID, doctors there were more likely to accept me when I extended them a shadowing request. So if you volunteer at a hospital system, definitely take advantage of it and try to reach out to doctors that you have and also use your resources because half of shadowing, in my opinion, is connections. So if you have a friend's parent who's willing to take you in for shadowing for a little bit, or you want to see like your grandparents' like geriatrician in action, you kind of want to don't be afraid to reach out.
Got it. Thank you. Um, Someone is asking, is there any good counseling service to help prepare essays and interviews?
That's a good question. I haven't used any. So, in terms of counseling, I looked to mentors, so people who are older than me who are already in medical school. I met those people through my work position, through my volunteer position, and they were willing to share anything with me. So unfortunately, I don't have any info on like counseling services because I haven't used any, and most of my friends, frankly, didn't use any either.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
hmm
Is shadowing with a dentist, does that help with medical school applications?
That's a good question. And unfortunately, the answer there is no, because dentists are their own kind of specialty, their own field. If you want to go to medical school, your shadowing wants to be concentrated around those medical specialties. But if you happen to be shadowing a dentist for a little bit and you happen to find out, okay, I don't like dentistry, I only like medicine, maybe you can use that as quote unquote evidence in your interviews when they ask why do you specifically want to be a doctor? You can say that you had that experience shadowing a dentist, but you kind of found out it wasn't for you. I think that's the only situation where it does apply, but otherwise, unfortunately, it doesn't.
I see. So you would say that like the type of shadowing definitely matters.
Yeah, as long as it's within the medical realm. I think like dentistry, PA, PharmD, those aren't, physicians, so.
Got it. Thank you.
hmm
Someone is asking, what is your opinion about the BSMD programs?
Good question. I still have conflicting opinions about BSMD programs. I just simply think that they're not for everyone, but for the people who they are for, they do a huge advantage to them. So for me personally, I went out of college, I mean, out of undergrad into college. I'm sorry, out of high school into college. And I was kind of still like wishy-washy about like, do I want to do medicine? Do I want to do another healthcare career? So I did not apply to any BSMD programs. But if you are like 100% sure that you want to pursue medicine out of high school, you can go for it. But my one warning is that don't kind of discount yourself or trap yourself. For those of us who struggle with self-confidence, I know I do myself, I tend to lock myself into things that are easier or more convenient too early. Because if I had applied to a BSMD program, I would have never been able to go through this process and to take that MCAT and to see my high MCAT score. And so I would have so many more options now. Rather than being locked into that one school, that one program, now I have numerous to choose from. So that's just my thing, but it also cuts down costs like financially and it also cuts down time. So if that's something you're interested in, then maybe the BSMD is for you. It really is, depending on the person.
Great, thank you. Um, would you say that there's like a big difference in terms of like impact on medical school application between medical assistant and a CNA?
A CNA, is that a
Is it a nurse
nurse?
assistant?
It might be a nurse assistant. That's interesting. I haven't heard of anybody I know doing CNA, because usually they apply to nursing school, I think. But honestly, I think CNA is very impressive because now that I think about it, a lot of the times they do work in these bigger hospital settings, and so they have more responsibilities. So I do think that CNA is quite impressive. I think in this case, honestly, a lot of people like to ask like which clinical experience is weighed better. It doesn't matter which experience it is. It matters how you write about it and how you use it to boost your application, if that makes sense. Because even if you have like a super rigorous experience like EMT and you don't make any connections with any of the patients and you can't speak to how it impacted you or medicine, then that's not going to be as impactful as, say, just a medical scribe, but you made those connections with the patient and you gained those insights into the healthcare system. So it does not matter so much the type of experience as much as how you describe it.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, Someone was wondering if there if these like the slides that you just talked about would be like posted anywhere.
Would you like me to? I can send them to ANACP and Medicine Connect, and I could totally, if more people would like it, then I don't mind doing that. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I think that would be nice. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. I'm gonna say the last question here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that taking a non-pre-med major and pre-med minor, such as engineer slash finance major and biology minor, would be a viable method of getting prerequisites done? Would you be seen as not truly invested in medicine by omissions?
So for that, that's very uncommon. I feel like it's more common to have just like a non-pre-med major altogether or a pre-med major altogether. So taking a minor, that's something that doesn't happen as common. In terms of if it's viable for prereqs, unfortunately, I do think the answer is no. Because if you do like a biology minor, for example, you're just going to be doing those biology classes, but you're not also taking the required chemistry prereqs and the like the physics prereqs and things like that. So I do think that it's fine if you do want to do that, but just be prepared to have to take extra classes kind of outside of your designated career path, if that makes sense. Um, in terms of like how it's weighted by medical school admissions, medical schools nowadays love non-traditional applicants. So if you find that your heart is kind of with another major, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you can really, really justify on your application and in your interviews why you ultimately decided to do medicine altogether.
Great, thank you very much.
Mhm.
Um, I believe that will be it for tonight. Once again, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Ms. Chow, for coming for giving this talk. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And thank you everybody for coming. I'm going to send these slides to Medicine Connect and ANACP, and hopefully they'll be able to put those out. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Alison. Very good talk.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I see you have experience with the AACP. We have a lot of students and parents listen to your talk. I think I taught more than 100 people
Wow.
in the group tonight. So hopefully you continue connect with the ACP. Also
Yeah.
hope our students from high school, college, or parents encourage your children participate in ACP youth program. We have a lot
Mhm.
of activities and give the opportunity for the students. We also can give you a certificate. If you volunteer in AACP, we can give you volunteer certificate,
Wonderful.
enrich your curriculum for your medical school. Thank
Mm-hmm.
you very much.
Of course. Thank you guys so much. I
Thank
also am
you.
going to leave my
Thank you,
email. I forgot to tag
Rina.
you on my email, but I'll leave it.